maybe we'll start. And as other people, I know other people are joining in. Um, we have about 276 people have registered. So I think people will be joining in the next few minutes, but maybe we should get started so that we respect our time. We have a lot of exciting speakers, and so we want to respect the time that we gave ourselves for this event. So let me just start formally by saying good morning and good evening. I see there are people from uh, the Americas, from Africa, Europe, Asia. So it's truly international gathering, and so you're all in different time zones. And thank you for making it. My name is Jenny Cafiso, and I am the executive director of Canadian Jesuits International. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome you to this webinar called Faith and Justice in an Era of Might Makes Right. And this is, we were playing around with different themes when we were planning this webinar. And when we first raised this topic in late January, we had no idea how much more relevant it was going to become. And so, while power in the interests of a few have always dominated national and international relations, right now this is being expressed unapologetically and with open defiance of any democratic and institutional rules. And so the question we must ask ourselves today is, how do we as people of faith committed to justice should respond to this context? So I'm honored to be co-sponsoring this event as CJI with St. Mark's College at the University of British Columbia, with Campion College, which is at the University of Regina, St. Paul's College, located within the University of Manitoba, and St. Jerome's University at University of Waterloo, as well as at Regis College. And so I would like to introduce now Dr. Susan Wood, who is the interim president of Regis College at the University of Toronto, and was my co-host for today's webinar. And I'm just totally delighted to be doing this with you, Susan.
Thank you, Jenny. The delight is absolutely mutual. We at Regis, which is the Jesuit Theologate in Canada, are delighted to be working with CJI to address this important issue. And I join Jenny in warmly welcoming all of you who are joining us today. The topic, the connection between faith and justice, is a key concept in the mission of Jesuits. The 1971 World Synod of Bishops stated the key concept that justice is a constitutive dimension of the Church's mission. Shortly after, in 1975, Jesuit General Congregation 32 redefined the Jesuit mission as the service of faith demanding a faith that does justice by addressing structural sin, inequality, and solidarity with the poor as a key issue rather than an auxiliary commitment. The phrase faith that does justice describes a commitment to addressing the root cause of injustice, moving beyond mere charity to a changing social structures. So our topic today is a way to put that principle to work and put boots on the ground, so to speak, in terms of accomplishing just that.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And my name is Peter Niemeyer, and I'm part of the team here at Canadian Jesuits International. So before we get started, I want to cover some logistical points. We will have a Q&A time after we've heard from all of the panelists. So if you want to pose a question to our panelists, please write that in the chat box. That will be recorded and sent to the co-host to pose your question to the panelists. I also want to welcome Jason Brennan, who's on site at St. Paul's, facilitating the in-person session there. And so if you are in the room, please indicate your question to Jason and he'll make sure that your question gets presented to the speakers as well. For everyone to be reminded that this session will be recorded, and all of you who have registered will receive a link to the recording from CGI. And we kindly ask you to keep your microphones muted during the session as well. Thank you.
We're all in different locations, but I would like to do a land acknowledgement from where we are hosting here in Toronto. This is a practice in Canada to recognize the presence of Indigenous peoples in the past and present, and the need for ongoing work for Indigenous justice. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is a new home now to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Please feel free to put in the chat the traditional territories you are joining us from today.
Great. Thank you, Susan. So let's get started then with Father Daniel. It's my pleasure to introduce Father Daniel Mwamba Mutale, who is a Jesuit and who is the Executive Director of the Jesuit Centre for Theological Reflection, also known as JCTR, which is a faith-based think tank based in Lusaka, Zambia, of the Jesuit province of Southern Africa, which I've had the pleasure to visit even last September, and it's a project that CGI has been supporting for a few years. Father Daniel's work focuses on the intersection of financial development and economic growth in emerging and developing economies. He pays particular attention to global challenges such as debt sustainability, inequality, and tax justice. Father Mutale is a frequent keynote speaker who has presented on global issues, including development, globalization, and migration at institutions such as Fordham University and the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. And outside of his professional work, he's passionate about photography, and he finds inspiration from capturing the beauty of nature. Father Daniel and I were together just last week at the inaugural meeting in Rome of the platform for divestment from mining, which he will be referring to, and which is being promoted by about 40 faith-based organizations worldwide. And we participated together in the press conference at the Vatican. So it's great to see you again now from a distance, and welcome, Father Daniel.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Susan, for that gracious introduction. And I'm grateful. I appreciate all of you that have joined from various parts of the world, our Mother Earth. I'm hoping that you can all hear me. If you cannot hear me, let the team that is working on logistics so that we all listen to each other as we have this conversation. So distinguished guests, colleagues, friends from around the world, we gather at a moment of profound moral tension in our world, across continents and communities. We are witnessing a troubling shift in global order. Power is increasingly displacing principle. Strength is too often mistaken for justice, and influence is too often used to define what is right. Now, for many in the global south where I come from, this is not an abstract concern. It is a lived reality. And this reality that we want to discuss today, that we're discussing today, faith and justice in an era of might makes right, it shapes many things. It shapes access to basic needs, to health, to education. And I'm speaking about really basic healthcare here. Basic education, access to decent accommodation on the roof, having a roof to sleep in for vulnerable families especially. The price of food in our markets, the burden of debt in our economies, the vulnerability of our economies to climate shocks, and of course, the dignity of our people. Just to demonstrate how real this is, I would like to give an example of what is trending nowadays concerning Zambia, the country Zambia itself. So a State Department, a US State Department, seen by the New York Times, confirmed what many of us tracking the question of healthcare, the US support for healthcare to Zambia, have suspected for months, maybe beyond months. So Washington is prepared to withhold HIV treatment funding from Zambia unless the government of the Republic of Zambia agrees to grant American companies preferential access to critical minerals. And when I say critical minerals, I'm talking about Zambia's copper, I'm speaking about cobalt, I'm speaking about lithium, I'm talking about manganese, all minerals. Those who followed the conversation around, the energy transition realize or recognize these as, key minerals when it comes to, the energy transition that we are experiencing globally. So basically, the idea is that, okay, so you need healthcare, very good. What we will do is that we can give you your healthcare, but we need this. There's this whole huge project that has been capped as Robito Corridor, so it involves Zambia, it involves the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola. It's a huge territory. There are more territories involved, and we know at this point that many negotiations have already happened across, the continent. I'm talking about Washington and different countries in Africa. And what is troubling for Zambia is that the deal itself that is being proposed is very different from what has been agreed with the other nations. There are some demands in it, in the memo that was seen, that clearly Zambia cannot meet. For instance, there's a need to match a certain amount of healthcare, but those who followed the debt debate, that Zambia is at the moment really highly indebted. When it comes to the budget for 2026, for instance, what is going to healthcare and education combined is way less than what the government has committed to spend on debt servicing alone, both internal and external debt. So it's really using power, as we are saying, to exert, undue influence and get, what a superpower really wants. So the question before us is urgent and unavoidable. Really, there are other examples that we can give of what's happening in the world, but I thought that example close to home does justice to the question before us. So what does faith demand in a world where might increasingly is defining what is right? To respond to this question, we must not only analyze the present crisis or crisis, if I may say so, we must return to deeper wells of wisdom. So across Africa and across global indigenous faith traditions, within our own wellspring of traditions, the Catholic social thought, we do find a shared ethical vision, a vision that is rooted in interconnectedness, in responsibility, in respect and reverence for the dignity of both human life, but also the dignity of Mother Earth. And these traditions remind us that no human being, nature doesn't exist in isolation. No nation stands alone, and no crisis is purely local. Our world is bound together in ways that are moral as much as they are economic and political. Today, the interconnectedness of our global challenges is undeniable. I've already referenced the question of critical minerals in the global south. These minerals empower the technologies, are empowering the technologies driving the global economy and the transition, the energy transition. Yet the extraction of these resources often comes at immense cost to local communities. Environmental degradation, displacement, and exploitation are too often the hidden price of global progress. This is not only an environmental issue, it is a geopolitical issue. It is a geo-economic issue. It is a moral issue. The question that I referred to of the Lobito Corridor in Zambia, we see many powers, it's really a battleground. We see the European countries, interested in that, the Eastern Bloc, particularly China, also interested besides Washington. It connects global supply chains to competition among powerful nations, to corporate interests, and to patterns of consumptions in wealthier parts of the world. It connects to debt because many countries rich in natural resources remain financially constrained. I don't want to overemphasize the question of Zambia. It connects to conflict. Congo here is a question in point. Because competition over resources does fuel instability and violence. It connects to ecological destruction, which disproportionately affects those who contributed least to the crisis. This is the reality of our time, my dear sisters and brothers. Our crises are interconnected, and so must be our moral response. We must also confront a hard truth. The current global order is increasingly shaped by power dynamics that are rarely questioned deeply enough. Who are the power players that are questioning our world today? I've made a few suggestions here. Nation states, certainly, but we know that not all nation states are equal. Multinational corporations, definitely, whose economic power in some cases even rivals that of many countries. We know corporations whose sales, whose market share, whose profits are way larger than GDPs of many poor countries, sometimes even put together. Global institutions such as the United Nations, I want to make a disclaimer here that we can obviously in the current context, in what has happened in the recent past, in what is happening worldwide now, we can question the sense in which the United Nations is a global power player, or the sense in which the United Nations provides a platform at which the interplay of power, particularly among nation states, take place. We can talk about other groupings. We are increasingly living in a multipolar world. Groupings such as the BRICS. We can talk about the G7, the G20 within the UN configuration, the G77, sorry, and of course different regional blocs. The EU, we have SADC, we have the African Union, and so forth and so on. We also know financial institutions that shape the terms of development and debt, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. We can talk about various development banks in different regions of the world. There are church and other faith communities which carry moral authority, but must continually discern how to exercise that faithfully. And increasingly, we know that there are ultra-wealthy individuals globally whose influence, of course, extends across borders and sectors. What we see is not a simple system, is a point that I'm insisting. It is a complex mix and often a mess of overlapping powers, interests, and agendas. In such a system, the danger is clear. Without ethical grounding, power becomes self-justifying. It begins to define justice according to its own interests. And this is what we mean when we speak of an era of might making right. We see it in the resurgence of global geopolitical competition, military alliances strengthening, bilateral ones, regional ones, economic cohesion becoming more common, resource control being central to global strategy. And for countries in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, in general countries in the global south, this often means being drawn into struggles that are not of our making. It risks reducing nation states once again to pawns in larger contests of power. We see it in the global debt system. Many developing countries remain trapped in cycles of borrowing and repayment that constrain their ability to invest in health, in education, and social protection. I already made reference to Zambia, but we know that is not unique to Zambia. It is something that is uniform across countries that are indebted like Zambia. From an ethical perspective, this raises a fundamental question. Can an economic system that perpetuates dependency and limits human flourishing truly be considered just? We see it in climate injustice. Those who have contributed least to global emissions suffer the most severe consequences. Droughts, floods, extreme weather events deepen poverty and displacement. We see it in widening inequality. Wealth continues to concentrate itself in the hands of few, while millions struggle for basic necessities. And we see it in conflict and war, where the pursuit of power leads to human suffering on a massive scale. In all this, we must remember one essential truth. The victim of these dynamics are not abstract entities. They are people, human beings with faces, with dreams, with hopes. They are families facing hunger, young people without opportunities, communities forced to migrate, workers exploited in supply chains, citizens whose voices are marginalized. At the heart of our response must be a commitment to human dignity. And this is where the wealth and the wisdom, the experience of Catholic social teaching offers a prophetic framework, one that resonates deeply with African indigenous spiritualities, as I've pointed out. And first of these is a principle of human dignity, which we know already that every person is created in the image and likeness of God. Dignity is not conferred by any institution, by any person. No political or economic interests can justify the erosion of that dignity. And second, preparation option for the poor. We must judge policies and systems by how they affect the most vulnerable. Third is solidarity, and this is not a vague sentiment. It is a moral commitment to recognize that we are responsible for one another. And fourth, but not by any means least, is subsidiarity. Decisions should be made at the most local level possible, empowering communities rather than imposing external control. And finally, the global common good. In an interconnected world, the common good must be understood beyond national and regional borders. Climate, migration, trade, and peace are not issues any one country can address alone. Yet these principles must not remain theoretical, they must shape action. Faith communities, including institutions like ours, the Jesuit Centre for Theological Reflection, Canadian Jesuits International, and many others who have joined and haven't been able to join, have a critical role to play. We must be the moral voice, speaking truth to power, sometimes when it is uncomfortable to do so. We must be a conscience, reminding societies that economic and political systems must serve people, not the other way around. We must be builders of solidarity, creating bridges across divides and fostering dialogue where there is division. At the same time, we must remain humble. We know that the church itself is part of a global system, and it must continually examine its own role and responsibility within these power dynamics. So what must change, you might ask? We must advocate for a more just global financial architecture. This includes meaningful debt relief and fairer financial systems that support development rather than constrain it. We must continue advocating and pushing for genuine climate justice, including real support for adaptation and addressing loss and damage. We must prioritize peace over militarization. I cannot overemphasize this, insisting on diplomacy rooted in justice rather than force. Pope Leo has really spoken strongly about peace. We must work toward more inclusive global governance, where the voices of the global south are not merely heard, but taken seriously. Beyond policy, where there is deeper transformation that is required, we must recover ethical reimagination. We must return to and learn from spiritual traditions that emphasize relationship, responsibility, and the sacredness of life. African worldviews, indigenous people's worldviews remind us that a person is a person through others. Indigenous traditions teach respect for the earth as a living system, not a resource to be exploited without limit. Catholic social thought calls us to integral ecology, where care for people and care for creation are inseparable. These perspectives challenge the logic of domination. They challenge the idea that power alone determines what is right. They call us instead to a vision of justice rooted in truth, in compassion, and in shared humanity. In closing, we must be clear. The rise of might making right is not inevitable. It is a choice that we continue to make, and it is a choice that can be challenged. Faith calls us not to despair, but to hope. Not a passive hope, but a prophetic hope that inspires action. We are called to challenge unjust structures, to amplify the voices of the marginalized, to promote peace, to defend the dignity of every person, and above all, to witness to a different way of being and hoping in a world. A way where justice is not defined by power, but where power itself is guided by justice. Thank you. I'll stop here and look forward to our conversation together. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Father Daniel, for your presentation. We are happy to introduce our first responder, Dr. Dawn Ray Flood, an associate professor of history at Campion College at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada. She's the author of the book, Rape in Chicago, Race, Myth, and the Courts, and the article, A Black Panther in the Great White North, Fred Hampton Visits Saskatchewan. Her research focuses on race and gender relations in a modern urban setting and radical activist movements in support of social justice. She's happy to know that her research on Fred Hampton's visit to the Regina campus of the University of Saskatchewan is currently being developed as a dramatic play and hopefully one day a limited run television series. Dr. Dawn Ray Flood.
Thank you, Susan. And good morning or afternoon or evening to everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you as well to Canadian Jesuits International and the sponsoring institutions for inviting me to participate today in this online event to discuss global issues during these troubling times. Thank you as well to Father Daniel for his thoughtful commentary. While I claim no particular expertise in international foreign policy or global diplomacy, I am a historian of the United States and have been working at Campion College, a Jesuit institution federated with the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, for over 20 years, where I've certainly learned an appreciation for the potential tensions of global relations and travel, as well as for the Jesuit emphases on social justice and cura personalis. The era of might makes right suggests that this is a new phenomenon. It is not. Throughout history, global empires have risen and fallen based on whose might triumphed at any given moment. What is arguably different in the world today are the circumstances that allow for the pushing of a historically familiar might makes right agenda. Unlimited monies, fed by unscrupulous actors betting on future riches claimed without regard to anyone or anything outside their own interests. Political leaders, uninterested in anything beyond their own power and preserving it at all costs. Exploited underdogs, often misinformed about how to react or even what can be done to prevent things like environmental degradation, the dismantling of broad social assistance supports at the local, national, and global levels, never-ending wars and violence perpetrated in the name of righteousness. This last point perhaps is also historically familiar, although I would argue that 21st century circumstances have altered the calculation of righteousness more so around capitalist profits for the oligarchs than for the glory of God, nation, or the crown. The challenges of dissent in 2026 include the dispersion of voices into singular voids. We read what the algorithms direct toward us. We seek out information about our interests, but that information can be similarly constrained by law in some places or by attempts at repression of speech that can be successful due to concerns about corporate profits being undermined by unfriendly government policies. No one talks to each other anymore because we are so convinced of our own position on any given point, on any given topic, that it seems pointless to engage. No one seems to want to learn. They only want their team to win. Now, as someone who grew up in Wisconsin in the United States and is a devoted Green Bay Packers fan, I get that. But I've also been known to enjoy a few beers with Chicago Bears fans anyway, even on game day. So if anyone from the Vatican is listening in, have Pope Leo give me a call in September. Maybe we'll get together for a game. But of course, we must not give up or stop protesting or stop talking, even if it seems to be into the void. One never knows where cracks in the facade will appear. People, not corporations, form communities. Individuals, not oligarchs, can help each other without concern for profits, but rather demonstrating care for humanity's future. As a historian, I've devoted much of my intellectual energies to analyzing past movements in support of social justice. The abolition of slavery, U.S. civil rights, and the ongoing pursuit of racial justice, feminist activism, widespread anti-war efforts, and the like. In every case, the grievances were significant and the solutions appeared distant, obstacles seemingly unmovable. But in all cases, it was everyday people, not governments, corporations, or any other institution that made change happen. How? By organizing and protesting, of course, but also by listening to what others needed and trying to manifest those needs through cooperative activities. The people of Minneapolis protected each other, and despite the murder of 2 white American citizens, amongst unknown instances of violence perpetrated against immigrants, whether documented or not, and people of color, some changes have come. The might of U.S. immigration policy has faltered in the face of community solidarity, and importantly, political polls and political calculations have also continued to shift. Occupying federal troops have quietly left U.S. cities when confronted by protests, many of which humorously expose an actual lack of danger, despite what right-wing media news disingenuously reports. And of course, the courts have ordered them out. The church has often provided the ideological will and the practical space for such organizing activities in the past. And the church can and will continue to do so today for anyone committed to change. But the church must also own up to its own participation in the institutional harms of the past in order to regain people's trust. In Canada, where I currently sit in Treaty 4 territory, the traditional territories of the Nihahawak, the Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota peoples, and the homeland of the Michif Métis Nation, the country grapples with revelations about religious connections to the horrors of the residential school system. A nationwide effort on truth and reconciliation is engaged in this difficult and ongoing work to acknowledge and address the traumas of settler colonialism. In the US, where current federal policy is based on the whims of a childish egotist and toxic men playing at war with disastrous consequences, either domestically through unrestrained ICE agents or globally through a current actual war launched mainly as a distraction from broader domestic crises and in pursuit of dominion over profitable natural resources, the church has a great challenge. Religious factionalism has prevented agreement around what should be universal principles of social justice and respect for humanity. Perhaps the words of an American pope whose quote on diplomacy based on force threatens the rule of law and peaceful coexistence, this quote directs today's event, can help bridge these ever-growing gaps. Those disinclined to listen to the words of a religious leader perhaps may be willing to hear the words of an American. It is important, of course, that Pope Leo continues to try, providing words and inspiration for a different type of leadership, one that is rooted for love of humanity, love for nature, love for individual dignity over corporate profits, and specifically condemning the actions of those who would preserve profit over people, violence over peace. And it is important for us to follow this lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flood, for your presentation. I now want to introduce our second responder, Dr. David Sheljak, who is a professor of religious studies at St. Jerome's University in Waterloo, Ontario, and a former chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Waterloo. With Paul Bramadat, I think he co-edited Religion and Ethnicity in Canada, as well as Christianity and Ethnicity in Canada. And he's a member of the editorial team working on the third volume of that series, Opening and Closing Relations, Indigenous Spiritualities in Canada. From 2005 to 2018, he served as the editor of the Ecumenist, a journal of theology, culture, and society, a journal established by Gregory Baum, who was my professor when I was in university, and published by Novalis. And he's the father of 5 children. So thank you very much, Dr. Sheljak.
And thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to Canadian Jesuits International, and especially to Father Daniel and to Dawn for their reflection. In my time, I wish to probe the role of religion in blessing the might makes right mentality in a variety of international contexts. Gregory Baum highlighted the ambiguity of religion by referencing the work of Max Weber in his Sociology of Religion. And there Weber talked about the priestly and the prophetic function of religion. The priestly function of religion is that it celebrates a community, it preaches the dominant ethics of the community, it blesses the status quo, it teaches us that what we are doing is right. Prophetic religion, on the other hand, speaks at a distance from religious institutions and the centers of power of traditional society. It's the outsider voice, and it judges the whole of the community, but especially the elites of that community, and it challenges the status quo. And so the might makes right ethic is not often a celebration of raw power. It is, as Dawn pointed out, historically disguised as morality. In other words, might is often blessed by the priestly function of religion. So despite the more recent acceleration of might makes right thinking and the naked exercise of coercive power, it's a good idea to ask, when does the era of might makes right begin? As Dawn pointed out, we have historical records of conquest, imperialism, enslavement, and genocide. Does it even begin in prehistory? Does it go back 40,000 years, for example, when Homo sapiens wiped out the Neanderthals? Is it, in fact, humanity's original sin? But I think for our analysis, it's best to follow Argentinian philosopher of liberation, Enrique Dussel, who traces the globalization of the might makes right ethic to 1492 and its aftermath, when the European countries emerge as the global conquistadors and colonizers. While other philosophers define the modern era as emerging from Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, Dussel adds that it equally emerged from a previous premise, ergo conquero ergo sum, I conquer, therefore I am. In other words, we become modern not simply through reason, science, technology, and other elements of civilization, but always and everywhere through conquest, which makes imperialism, racism, sexism, and class violence, among other forms of injustice, integral parts of the modern world. So first, the Portuguese and the Spaniards learned to enrich themselves from overseas conquest and trade, Dussel writes. Then come the Dutch, the French, and the Germans, and of course the British, who perfected in the 19th century. After World War II, it's the United States that adopts a different strategy of neocolonialism, focusing on indirect political power and economic dominance through capitalism, rather than naked conquest and colonization. Hence, the might makes right is globalized in that colonized societies learned that they too had to modernize or be colonized. What we used to call the forced march into modernity of colonized societies led them to industrialize and to turn to mass politics from their traditional aristocracies and monarchies. And so we saw the emergence of movements of national resistance, sometimes rooted in Marxism, China, Vietnam, for example, or ethnicity or religion. Because of the power and reach of European modernity, what we call the West, writes Dussel, there is no outside. To be sure, the West did not teach China, India, Japan, or Russia the ethic of might makes right. They were all empires before the modern era, but they now exist in a globalized system of might and right, a system that is still dominated by the West and which they cannot escape. This also explains why the interlocking multi-crises that Father Daniel describes so well cannot be broken down into individual crises that are addressed one by one. For example, how do we tell China to cut down on its use of fossil fuels when 2 centuries of European global dominance have taught the Chinese that to fall behind in industrial production means neocolonial domination and economic exploitation? In other words, they simply won't do it. To bring these two themes together, I want to examine very briefly instances of the religious sacralization of the might makes right regimes. Now, Don has already talked about American Christian nationalism, but on the outside, there is also the Orthodox Christianity and Putin's agenda of Ruski Mir, the Russian world, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India and the Hindutva movement. We could also look at Buddhist and national movements in Myanmar and Sri Lanka. We could look at Israel and Palestine, but I will just focus on Russia and India for my remarks today, as well as American Christian nationalism. American Christian nationalism teaches that America is a Christian nation. Its law should be rooted in Christian values, and being a Christian is marker of being a real American. It is patriarchal, focused on being straight, white, militaristic, macho, and capitalist, with a strong disregard for the poor. And now we see in the Operation Epic Fury, Christian triumphalism justifying American expansionism. We are good because we have the right. We have the right religion. How do we know that? Because we are the winners. How did we become the winners? Because we had the right religion. It becomes this circle of self-justification. But you see the same in Russia with Putin and his reliance on orthodoxy. Putin was a KGB agent, and he witnessed the fall of the Soviet Union and the crisis that followed afterwards. He opposed the Soviet oppression of the Orthodox Church. He wanted Orthodox Christianity to serve as a pillar of Russian nationalism. So Putinism is this combination of patriotism, collectivism, solidarity, and Державность, the destiny to be a great power. And so Orthodox Christianity blesses his nationalism and expansionism. And Patriarch Kirill of Moscow has certainly served that role, calling the Russian campaign invasion of the Ukraine in 2022 a fight for civilization against the decadent West. We say the same dynamic, and here I'm relying on the work of Mark Juergensmeyer, who's done the most brilliant work in this area. We see the same dynamic in the Hindutva movement in India, which is a religio-cultural nationalism promoted by the BJP, the Indian People's Parties, and others. It officially promotes Indian culture against Westernization. It rejects the idea of a secular India, which is guaranteed by the Constitution, protects Hindu traditions and interests, and defines India as a Hindu homeland. It sees itself as a decolonization movement. But Modi and the BJP have certainly targeted the Muslim population in India, which is 16% of the Indian population, in their campaigns. So here we have what I'm talking about is the coercive nature of modernity. The West is pushing, the rest are resisting, but to resist, they must modernize and become like the West. And I'm also talking about the ambiguity of religion. Sometimes religion opposes, and sometimes it supports this movement. So what I want, and Father Daniel is obviously talking about opposing these coercive tendencies in modernization. And so, yes, the focus on Catholic social teaching and the 5 pillars that he mentioned, but there are other parts of the agenda that I would add very quickly. The first is self-criticism. We in the West, and I'm speaking as a Westerner, have to be critical about the West's involvement in global dominance, in colonization, and in the response of others to our dominance. We don't, radical Islam, that we want to call it that, didn't arise out of nothing. It arose out of Western imperialism and a response to that imperialism. It doesn't justify it, but it also contextualizes it. We must ask, what is the responsibility of our societies, our government, in creating an international order that creates the conditions that promote the rise of might makes right populism around the world? The third point is that of religious self-criticism. What is the role of our religion, our churches, and other religious community in creating, supporting, and celebrating the current world order? And finally, the necessity of creating and nurturing interfaith groups dedicated to social justice, economic repair, peace and stability, etc., to address the interlocking evils that Father Daniel has described so well. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That is great. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thanks to all the responders in addition to Father Daniel. So this is the time now. These have been very, very rich interventions with a lot to think about and discuss. So I would encourage people to write their questions in the chat box. I also want to point out to the fact that Father Jeffrey Burwell, who's the provincial of the Jesuits of Canada, who is in Newfoundland in the middle of meetings and traveling, made a very quick appearance, but he couldn't stay. But he did put a note in the chat box, which you can all read, in which he expresses gratitude to all of us and encouraging us, all of us, in this work that we're doing. So I encourage you to read it. I'll just read that the end. He said how our commitment sustains the Jesuit mission in a very real way, And it's a reminder that the call to promote justice and be an agent of reconciliation is not abstract, but something we each live out in concrete ways together. So that's a very good way to, in some ways, to summarize what we have just heard. But let's, so if people have questions, please write them down and in the chat box. And I will start, Susan and I will read some of the questions that have come in, and we will encourage Father Daniel or one of the responders to respond. I wanted to start with actually one about the natural resources that was referred to by Father Daniel. One question is, what is a faith-based or theological response or reflection on the natural resource curse? The person who asked this question says, how should we interpret the poverty of naturally wealthy places in our world from a faith tradition? So I don't know if Father Daniel, who was the one who referred to the whole issue of natural resources, whether you would like to respond to that, please.
Yes, thank you, Jenny, and thank you for raising that really important question. Much has been written, around natural resources. The word that has been used, I would put it in inverted commas, the natural resource case, right? I would begin by arguing, by pointing out that I see natural resources, creation around us as a blessing. That's something that is there to sustain us, right? Provide beauty, but we know, and giving a theological response to that, we can appeal to particularly the second creation story in the second chapter of the book of Genesis, and that humanity is there. We are stewards of creation. We are there to coexist. We are there to respect, to see creation as sacred, as something beautiful. And also that, other people who inhabit this world, have dignity in them. We need to begin. I think we need to get back to that really basic principle. I love what Pope Leo XIV does in Derek's Day, really emphasizing on what the Pope calls authentic solidarity, right? And one that begins by recognizing that humanity, the humanity and the dignity in another person, recognizing that first. What within the African spirituality, African theology is called Ubuntu. And how that recognizes that narrow definition of my neighbor, of a person that I should pay, attention to. I think this invitation to conversion, to realize that no, my neighbor is not just somebody who shares my nationality, my religion, maybe my name or the village where I come from, or the social class even, but that solidarity, that recognition of humanity and dignity in the person goes beyond those familiar circles towards, people who are affected by those natural resources. Those who are threatened by climate change, families that suffer from poisoning, their environment, poisoning creation. I think that is really, really key. Beginning to work towards conversion, if I may use that, to what our original calling, the original calling to humanity, I would say, is getting to see things in the eyes of dignity, in looking at creation, that our relationship with creation is that of one of a steward and creation, rather than us being those who exploit. It's sad when you see where the mines are, and I know this is not just particular to Zambia, but you see that they are, open cast mining, what is called open pit mining in some cases, or even underground mining, the tunnels that are put in there. Sometimes there are no plans, of what happens after the mining is over. Do we leave dams of water which then gets infected by by all sorts of pathogens, things that can even continue to harm us and continue to harm our environment. I would say it's really a huge call to humility and a huge call to conversion. That would be my response to the question around a natural resource, a theological response to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, Father Daniel. We now have a question from Dr. Fiona Lee from St. Mark's at UBC. And Fiona, it's all up to you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you. I was actually starting to type it out while the original question was being asked. Thank you so much to all the presenters today. Like Jenny was saying, there's just so much to unpack and so much to think about. So I look forward to all the future discussions we'll have about this. I think something that ties all of these presentations together, besides the question of might makes right, is interrogating these relationships that we have and how power is kind of imposed in these relationships. And so I wanted to look at this term power because I feel like we're kind of dancing around it on some levels. And so for Father Daniel, you talked about Catholic social teaching already. And so that's a really great way of kind of reframing how we understand power. And so I wanted to give a little bit more time for you to talk about that. But I also was wondering, for all the panelists, because you all talked about self-criticism as one way of renegotiating or rethinking how we can tackle this issue of might makes right. How can the church be an example of an alternative understanding of power, given its history with colonialism? And I would argue that even now, on certain issues, it is still kind of imposing that kind of, I don't want to say colonial relationship, but maybe a more coloniality kind of relationship where there is a hierarchy. And so how can the church do that job?
Thank you. Who would one of our responders or Father Daniel like to respond to that question?
I'm happy to start. Then David and Dawn can come through. And really, thank you, Fiona, for pinpointing and bringing us to one really important concept. And you're right that we didn't quite dig into this concept of power. So my first comment, or my preliminary comments, I'll let my David and Dawn dig deeper into this question. I just want to recognize really that the obvious truth that the power is complex, right? It is a multifaceted concept, and we can interpret it through various lenses. They can be theoretical, they can be social, obviously organizational, even religion, as we have pointed out, right? We know what it is. We're looking at power, and the way I'm looking at this multi-dimensional complex reality called power is that it is this ability for an actor or a group of actors to influence or to control the behavior, decisions, sometimes even desires of other people, or to achieve those specific goals, right? And we know there are different expressions that power has, there are different faces that it has, then there are different sources, obviously. So I'll stop here just to recognize how complex and important what you've pointed to, Fiona, is to this discussion. I'll let David and Dawn dig deeper on the question. Thanks.
Don or David, would you like to say something?
Sure, I'll chime in here just to, I think, reiterate, it's an excellent question. And um, I mentioned in my response how the church must grapple with its own role in institutional harms of the past. And this is at the forefront of my mind right now. I'm currently directing an honors student research project on the horrors of the residential school system and in Canada. And I think that, we talk about land acknowledgements and we talk about the harms of settler colonialism, and it might seem superficial at times, but I think that talking about these things, giving voice to these things, is significant. And as people hear, whether or not they're listening, but as they hear comments on this, as they hear the church acknowledging its role in the harms of the past, it's an ongoing process. It's not something where you can make a singular statement and say I'm sorry, but you have to really grapple with the situation. And so, I mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada. That was certainly a governmental led commission, but it's something that the church was involved with as well. And the church making statements about its role. And so I think repeating these things over and over and engaging in the ongoing process not just spreads the word, but it helps people to listen and to actually hear, right? A point I tried to make was the difference between hearing and listening. So we can only just keep trying, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you, Don. David?
Yeah, this is a great point. I talked about the globalization of might makes right ethic, which starts with imperialism and colonialism, but it really accelerates with the newer imperialists, the French, the Dutch, the British. It accelerates with capitalism. And it's capitalism has been brought up in our discussion today, but I think it needs to be centered. For example, Father Daniel talked about natural resources and clearly would like to see the Catholic social teaching, the universal destination of the earth's good for the common good. But it's through the globalization of capitalism that resources were redefined, the commons were privatized. The minerals in Zambia, for example, now have become private property, either of the state or of individual investors, very often foreign investors. And Canadian mining companies are at the forefront of global injustice and environmental destruction when it comes to, to mining operations around the world. So it's the privatization of the commons for the purpose of exploitation, for the purpose of profit. And what we have here is an interlocking system of coercion where even the powerful feel that they cannot let go of the might makes right ethic. They feel that if they let go, I mean, this is what's going on in the United States right now, which is powering the MAGA movement right now, is this fear that if they stall, if they turn to green energy, if they decide on peace and compromise instead of war and coercion, that they'll fall behind. And it's what's driving the Chinese, it's what's driving the Brazilians and the Russians and the Indians all along. And so what the churches and the world's religious communities have to focus on is finding some way out of that coercive trap. It really feels like to use another one of Max Weber's metaphors, an iron cage that is closing around us. That whoever gets off that treadmill, whoever says, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, is going to lose because everyone else was going to win and continue with this kind of this crazy logic. So
thank you. Sorry.
I think
Oh,
this is
sorry.
what we have. Sorry, this is what the churches have to face: is create some space of hope, some counter narrative that people can believe in, and act out that counter narrative. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all three of you for this response. We're going now to St. Paul's in Winnipeg to Jason Brennan, who is with a group taking part in the session in person. And so, Jason, please introduce the person who's prepared the question.
Thank you, Jenny. I think Dr. Stan, if you're there, will have prepared a question. So I'm going to turn it to him.
I don't know if we can see.
Yes,
Thank
you. Thank you for that. Yeah,
right.
and thank you so much for your presentations, and you could feel it in one's heart, so to speak. Pope Francis kind of made a reference that in our world, it's a world of indifference, but definitely in this forum, we don't see that. And I wonder, are we really talking about power as we traditionally understand it? I'm attracted to someone like Hannah Arendt, who makes a distinction, and power exists only in a mutually related among people. We're really talking. Might is right. It's a phrase that is about force. It's not about power. It's not about inclusion, but it's about force. And that force comes with a backing. I don't like what you're doing. I will freeze your dollars and cents in academic institutions if you do not do this. And unfortunately, this is what we're seeing. It's about force. And so as soon as we talk about force, then what is negated in our world is one of reciprocity. And I wonder, not only in relation to between people, but also in our own relation with nature, what Mother Earth has to offer us. So I wonder if our speakers could talk about, are we really talking about force here? And all the forceful relationships that we see being played out in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would one of our speakers like to respond to that, to Dr. Stanley's question?
I'm certainly happy to comment in agreement with Dr. Stanley. I think that this very much is about a concept of force over power. True power does not need to operate in a corrupt manner necessarily. And I think that especially if we look at, kind of the rise of dictatorial tendencies and the rise of the right in the world today, not just the United States, it's definitely force being used to kind of hide an actual lack of power, right? Certainly, again, I'm from the United States. I study the US history, and it would seem to me that President Trump has very little real power, but is very adept at using force to assert that imagined power. So I think you're absolutely correct, Dr. Stanley, that we are talking about force here. And I guess the question is, how do we counteract that force with force of our own? And yeah, there's no easy solution to that, but certainly I just wanted to chime in agreement.
Thank you.
My way of thinking is that power is ambiguous. Everything has a dark and a light side, and the dark side of power is force. But there's the light side of power, which is modernity has also empowered people. It's empowered us to educate our children, to take care of one another through universal health care, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all the good things of modernity. The trouble is that it comes with a shadow that we often neglect or ignore or justify.
I'd like to thank our speakers for a wonderful conversation. As I listen to you and reflect on it, we have no answers, obviously, but what we have done is put some of the issues on the table, which is so important. And what strikes me is that two of the main themes that came through is the issue of political might and economic might, and how those are intersecting, but they're also quite different because capitalism has escaped national control. The economic laws are on their own treadmill, so to speak, and are outside of the control of any one nation, even though, powerful nations can wield that power, but it's still not complete control. And so what's missing, I think, are the checks and balances that we may have had or imagined having at another time, which is probably the truer statement. But the issue of checks and balances on both economic forces and political forces, and we're seeing a lack of checks and balances in the United States in terms of the inability of Congress to respond to executive power, but also, I think there's a lack of check and balances just generally. So I just want to offer that as kind of an observation from a bird's eye view of this. This is not my area of theological expertise, but it's been a very rich conversation, and thank you very much.
Yes, we thank you, Susan. I also I know that this time has gone so quickly. I can't believe we're already at the end of our time. So many rich ideas and concepts and ideas that were shared. And there are also a lot of questions that we have listed here and that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to, even though they're very interesting, and I know that our speakers would really be able to delve into them. So to me, this says that we need more of this time kind of space for us to share, particularly at this time when we're all feeling somewhat overwhelmed, I think, by what's going on around us. I think one thing that to me, a panel like this and the people who are here tells me how our focus always has to be to listen to the voices and the margins. When we try to figure out what do we as people of faith do in this context is to always listen to the people on the margins. And I'm really grateful for the speakers, the responders we had today, and certainly to Father Daniel for bringing the voice of from Africa, what they are living in Zambia, and that is just one example of the struggles that are being lived right now, where decisions are being made that have life and death consequences, and we hear stories of that every day in our work here at CJI, where decisions are being made between medication or debt repayment or others, and they have life consequences. So I think we need to wrap this up. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. A special thank you to Dr. Daniel Mutale, to Dr. Don Flood, and to Dr. Davis Lajak, and also a big thank you to Dr. Susan Wood for co-hosting today with me from Regis at Regis College at U of T. And I just want to thank everyone gathered in person, also in Winnipeg, and to all those of us all the people who joined us from across Canada, but also from around the world. I'm amazed at the level of representation today at this webinar. So big thank you also to Father Jeffrey, the provincial, who supported us in this work. And I want to also say thank you to the CJI team, who has put a lot of effort into pulling this together, particularly Peter Niemeyer, but the whole team, but also the teams of the various institutions that co-sponsored this event. This was definitely a joint effort. And I think we will do more of this. I think it made the event a lot richer. I don't know if Father Daniel wanted to say one final word before we say goodbye to everyone.
Yes, I do. First, to reiterate your thanks, really my thanks to really to the Canadian Jesuits International for putting up this excellent webinar, for this series of webinars. Many thanks to you, Jane Kafiso, Dr. Susan Wood, an amazing job you've both done in animating this conversation. Dr. Freud, Dawn, really a wonderful conversation today and on Monday. Dr. David, Sajak, beautiful, wonderful. It was a pleasure listening to your thoughts, and to our viewers and listeners and contributors. I mean, this couldn't have been a richer conversation without. I just want to say that, speaking from my tradition, my Catholic Christian tradition, that we are people of hope. We continue digging into the history that Dawn referenced, how at moments like this, human, simple people who have no power in courts have risen and come together and been a force for the good. We can be that again, and we know that there are many places, areas quietly where many people are making quiet changes, not making headlines. They're doing that, but we can still do that. May we continue to be that force of hope. May we continue to be a source of light in this world that so badly needs it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mutale. Thanks to Dawn. Thanks to everyone who participated, and particularly thanks to all the colleges and to that put this together. And thank you all for participating, for being present. And you will hear from us soon. Please check our websites. There are lots of events going on all the time, so please keep in touch, and we'll be in touch with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone.